Thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica podcast. I am Mustafa Sharif, an urban planner, and you're more than welcome to join my big journey of exploring the making of smarter and more livable cities. Please don't forget to follow Urbanistica on the different social media platforms, and also let's connect on LinkedIn. Big thanks to Urbanistica podcast partner AFRY. AFRY is an international engineering and design company providing sustainable solutions in the fields of energy, industry, and infrastructure. Are you ready for a new episode? Let's go for it.
Today I have three great guests. I have the pleasure to welcome Ania, Hanna, and Ulrika. Hey, and welcome to Urbanistica podcast.
Thank you, Mustafa.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mustafa.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really interesting episode. You are our storytellers, and I would love to start with you, Ania. How would you like to introduce yourself, and please tell us about your passion?
Wow, it's so great to be here. My name is Ania Öst. I would say the short version is that I'm a teacher, I'm a researcher at KTH, and I'm also practicing architect at Gaia Arkitektur. So that's where I am in life today.
What are you passionate about, Ania?
Right. Well, maybe just going back to the beginning, I grew up in Stockholm. I think I spend most of my time during summers in Skåne, in a family house, a really nice little, I would say, system imbalance almost, where my grandma had developed this fantastic life where the older generation could live on top, and there was this bicycle workshop in the basement, and this very kind of fertile kitchen garden, and all that kind of. For me, I think that has been an inspiration in life, as this was really like a life in balance, I would say. But otherwise, I would say that I get a passion from environments or living environments where culture and nature kind of interact in a beautiful way.
That's amazing. You say culture. You didn't say like the social aspect and the nature. You say culture.
Yeah, I think culture is maybe a word that entails all that we are kind of doing as people, humans.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So moving to Hanna, how are you doing, Hanna?
I'm fine, thank you.
So you're our storyteller as well. Please give us a highlight about you and tell us about your passion.
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Hanna Erixon Aalto. I'm also a practicing architect, just like Ania and Ulrika. And I'm a teacher at KTH. I've been teaching since 2005. And I'm also the co-founder of the Urbanism and Landscape Studio at KTH that we will speak about a bit today. I'm also a researcher at KTH. I hold a PhD in critical studies of architecture. And my thesis had the title Projecting Urban Natures, which I think kind of sums up my core interests, both in my research and practice, which lies in exploring and developing kind of more integrated social ecological approaches to urban planning and design.
Yeah, very interesting. And yeah, it will be interesting storytelling soon when we will dig deep into the Urbanism and Landscape Studio. Moving to Ulrika. How are you, Ulrika?
I'm fine. Thank you, Mustafa.
Thank you so much for being here. So how would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us about your passion.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I'm a trained architect. That's why I'm in this space right now. I came into this studio in the beginning of March when Hanna was away for a few months, and it was great to join this company. I have a master from Lund University. I also studied in Oslo, did an internship in Japan. But the postgraduate studies of Mayan brought me to Stockholm, and I stayed here. I've been in small offices, big offices, the last 12 years at White Architecture, where I also was a partner before starting Gaia with Ania Matta Bolmark and Pi Ekblom in the autumn of 2020. And I think really going into this studio, I appreciate it so much because I grew up in a small town on the east coast of Sweden, Kalmar, where the Baltic is very present. We went sailing every summer, very simple life, 1 month at least in June. Cold, but the waters were rich with fish. And then the rest of the summer I spent on Öland, which is also in the middle of the Baltic. So getting to know the Baltic through this course with the blue wedges was really interesting to me.
So the blue and green structure is part of your life, basically.
Yeah, I'm passionate about nature. Culture too, but I think nature comes first because it feels like it's so, I woke up to this, the state of nature, that we're not living in balance with nature, and that's what I'm passionate to try to be part of reestablishing that balance.
Yeah, it will be very interesting talk later. Also, we're going to talk about these values. Let's start with you, Hanna, field of study. So what is the focus of the Urbanism and Landscape Studio?
Yeah, so the Urbanism and Landscape Studio really focuses on, cities, landscapes, and territories in the broader context of the environmental crisis, but also the climate crisis. And I think also on the note on what I'm passionate about, which I realized I kind of missed that question. We live in times now of great challenges. As we all know, over half of the world's population live in cities, and at the same time we're in this kind of crisis, both regarding the environment but also the climate. So all these questions related to that, about elevated sea levels and storms and flooding, long dry periods like we experienced a few summers ago in Sweden, but also a kind of general loss of resilience and of biodiversity, becomes increasingly more and more relevant in relation to the urban context. And I think this really requires a shift in the way we plan for and organize our cities. And I think it's really intriguing to think about, what the sustainable and resilient city of the 21st century could look like. And there's kind of a huge untapped potential here in the role that design professions can play in this kind of projecting and imagining these alternative futures.
So how do you imagine a sustainable and resilient city, like of the 21st century?
Well, I think that, it's fantastic to do this work together with students. What we try to do is to kind of empower students to develop this both critical but also projective and systemic outlook to these challenges. And we really try to frame the issues that we are looking at in this kind of hands-on live way. So the questions become less abstract, but more really, dealing with real world challenges.
And talking about challenges, you mentioned now that the role of designers. So when we talk about challenges, of course, we have to mention the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030. So what can the role of designers be in addressing the agenda?
Yeah, I think that, when solving these really urgent questions that are outlined in Agenda 2030, we are coming from a tradition that is rooted in a kind of reductionist thinking. And we tend to try to kind of pick the problems apart and isolate various components with this goal of kind of ending up at a true or false answer, I think here. And I think that this type of problem solving is really important. It has a role to play somehow. But when it comes to the urban scale and these questions that we usually think about as wicked problems, there is these are problems that are complex and interconnected and contested, and then we need this new type of problem solving. And I think that this involves, methods for synthesizing various aspects and to kind of connect the dots between different fields, try to find synergies. and also combining this analytical way of thinking with a projective way of thinking. And I mean, just not ask, what does this look, what does this look like, or how has it become this way, but also how do we want it to look like? What do we want it to be? And that's really at the heart of what architects and urban designers are trained to do. That's what we're good at, right?
Yeah, exactly. So within what field of study is this studio positioned?
Well, like the name implies, the Urbanism and Landscape Studio, we really see the studio as placed kind of in between various sub-disciplines. So in this sense, the studio both relates to this kind of, I would say, like nexus of ideas that has emerged within landscape urbanism and ecological urbanism. And we also draw from resilience theory and the environmental humanities. But all these fields in turn have in common that they want to kind of transgress borders and challenge this siloing of disciplines. And I think that's really interesting if we look at how the education is kind of set up today. It's really organized in relation to scale a lot. We have kind of architecture, dealing with the object scale down to the detail of, say, a brick. And then we have the urban design in the middle scale with a master plan, and then planning kind of operating on this, regional scale. But if we start to look at a theme like we have done this year on water and masses in relation to urbanism and sea level rise, and you kind of follow that theme, you quickly notice that you need all these scales at the same time. So, I mean, just to give an example of the studio, our students have done an incredible job that really spans across all these scales, from the regional that can involve how to strengthen biodiversity on a kind of regional scale and provide land for new development, which is a huge issue in Stockholm. But down to, then they have work that goes down to a technical detail, kind of a material that can look at, cavities and patterns in the material that can attract marine life. And all of this is part of the same project and part of the same, answering the same question somehow.
And me working as an urban planner, what I see like in different cities, unfortunately, when we talk about city planners, we don't talk really so much about nature. We talk about the hard, solid materials. And I would love to ask you, like, what is your view on the relationship between city and nature? Is there any relationship?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a relationship. And I think that the structuring of nature and city into this kind of dualistic balance relationship is really at the heart of Western culture. I think in my PhD thesis, I really studied how this influences us, and it really makes its way into kind of the general planning discourse and into formal planning documents. And it also influences, distinctions between professions, like we just talked about, the way of kind of separating things. And with this, there comes a view of the city as something very kind of active, creative, dynamic, and generative, but where nature is in turn passive and something rather static. I think for urban designers and architects, we look at nature as rather static, and also I think in need of protection, of something pristine, right? And what we want to do in the studio is really flip this perspective and ask, what would happen if nature and ecology and landscape becomes a starting point and kind of organizer of space instead? So these green and blue infrastructures become the catalyst that generates and sets the foundation for all the other services to occur in the city that we also need.
So you see there is like a fundamental role for landscape and ecology in the city.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we have some excellent examples again in the studio, how through kind of reconnecting with the water in Stockholm, not just seeing it as this pretty backdrop and kind of view, to set for the built environment, but instead this kind of productive, generative landscape that can be a basis for new living environments. It can be a network to set off a small-scale business. It can be something for tourism, and it can be about creating new types of public spaces and so forth.
Yeah, and actually, like, one of the main points why we are like recording this, because finally I see like a studio gathering between urbanism and landscape, which is like a great, and this is what we need in order to have planners that think about the ecological aspect when they plan cities. So I'm really happy that you're doing this, but I also want you to highlight, like, why is there a need for this type of studio, like in this particular time? Especially now, like we have the pandemic, the environmental crisis, and so on. Like, what is your reflection?
Well, I think that if we go to the pandemic now, it has really shown how fragile our systems are in society in some way, and I think that that also applies to urban planning and urban design. That we have been working a lot with the kind of short-term economic perspectives, as our first kind of filter. But I think we really need to start thinking more long-term and really developing urban planning strategies and urban design strategies that can handle, for example, climate change, but also turn it into something fantastic and innovative, not just, coping with this and surviving somehow, but actually turning it into maybe an opportunity in a way.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And I'm actually curious because you're a practicing architecture and like doing research and teaching as well. So what are your thoughts about the relationship between like practice and academia, like the doing and the thinking? And do you really like reflect this in the setup of this studio?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it can be answered in many ways. I think on a kind of really zoomed out scale, it's super important to really create these better links today. And I think that, again, back to what design professions are good at, I think we have a good potential to really bridge this gap because we are combining the analytical with the doing all the time. And that's how many studios are set up at KTH as kind of research environments. And also I would say all the research going on at the architecture school at KTH really has this, the doing and the thinking in one somehow. But maybe I can pass over to Ania a bit about how we really try to implement this in the studio, because I think for us, we have really tried to somehow, empower students to take on this both critical, but at the same time projective way of thinking about these problems. And really, Ania is going to tell you a bit more about how we have framed the course, but we really wanted to take this issue of urbanism and climate change and the environmental crisis, but make it very, very hands-on, actually connected to masses. That's something that is really tangible,
Yeah. Is there any specific theme for this studio?
We can.
The current theme.
The current theme. Yeah, I might talk a bit more then about the research project MASSA. There is this research project called MASSA. It's financed by Formas. It has a 4-year grant. It started now in January. And we 3 here are all part of this research project, but it's a collaboration between the City of Stockholm, KTH, School of Architecture, Studio Erikson Aalto, which Hanna is a part of, and her husband Erik, and also Gaia Arkitektur, which I and Ulrika, we are a part of together with Marta Bolmark, which is also the process leader. So this is a research project that is going on, and the studio runs basically parallel to this. The students can benefit from a lot of things happening within the research project, basically, and also the network that is built up within that research project. And as I mentioned, the topic is this of the stone residue that comes up from from the extension of the subway. But there are many infrastructure, large-scale projects going on in Stockholm that generates these enormous amounts of stone. So we are looking at how to basically turn this stone residue into a resource to support and maybe develop like a more resilient city on water, let's say. We have many challenges in Stockholm. We are facing seawater level rising. I mean, on a long kind of time perspective, this Lake Mälaren can actually become a saltwater lake again after the new Slussen has kind of played out its role. We're talking about 80, maybe 100 years from now. So this is maybe a major challenge, but then we have all the other challenges that are, we have erosion problems along many shorelines. We have lost a lot of habitats since we have altered basically all shorelines in the inner parts of Stockholm. So we have also issues with water quality, pollutions both on land and in water. The city is growing rapidly. We have a need for more housing units, but that's of course also comes with a big need for more public spaces, basically, and qualitative public spaces. So there are all these kind of challenges, and we are basically looking at how could we use this stone residue as a resource to maybe meet some of these challenges and yeah, reshape basically how the city meets the water. So yeah, the students are supported to come up with innovative solutions and design strategies for how to do this, basically.
So Ania, how do you support students to develop like an interest and understanding for these type of important aspects?
Right. Yeah. This studio is a master studio, so it's also that the students are quite high up in their educational level, basically. So in this view, I think it's very important to also, as we are in the society in a level where we have to be innovative to kind of come up with ideas of how to build our cities in the future, and also build our culture, nature cities, if we may. So therefore, it's very important to kind of also connect to the research forefront, basically, to be there with the students. So I think that's definitely a goal we have. And also this question about how to motivate students in this aspects and in this work. We see, of course, that it's very motivating to work with current issues that are like pressing today, that we all have to kind of, so instead of kind of finding a theoretical topic, that we instead really try to kind of frame the studio so it's based on current issues and problems that we all need to kind of ponder about. So that's one way of motivating. Of course, we also then try to make the students talk to different involved actors, also to the people that are actually involved in these questions and issues. I know that architects have been criticized for being quite introverted, sitting, within our previously also blamed as ugly building and just thinking for ourselves. So I think this is something we really kind of work with to reach out in society as we're working with the society and talk to the people that are involved, basically.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, like these issues are very big and complex. So does the studio take in perspective from other practices?
Yes, this is a really key issue. We are kind of inviting different also speakers, and also in workshops and so on, actors from society, both from like official municipality kind of representatives, also from the industry, and experts, of course, within different fields like ecologists, technicians, engineers, and like artists, so that the students can see that there are many perspectives and angles to basically see the problem from. And I think this is really something I learned from a course in pedagogical teaching at KTH, that and also in relation to teaching in sustainability questions, that there is not one answer, right? We are quite used to thinking black and white and so on, but when you look at these sustainability issues, it's always that depending on the perspective of the person you ask, you will get different answers. So that's also extremely relevant to kind of look at different perspectives. And as Hanna was talking about previously, this what could be, and where we as architects could really have an important role is maybe to listen in and see these different voices and see, okay, what could be like the holistic perspective of the issue. So yes, we are talking to a lot of people.
That's amazing, because also now, like when I see like students collect so many different point of views, stories, in order to imagine the future. So are there like any specific methods? Like what are the methods used to support students to imagine alternative future?
Right. Yeah, I think that one way is that we start with also looking at international references. It's always good to have something like a reference to see, okay, I can understand this now, I can take it further or make it more local and so on. So that's one method we do use. We are also looking actually into like historical perspectives. I mean, it's sometimes hard to kind of understand where we are today and see what are actually the relationships today. So by looking at historical kind of relationships between human culture, nature, technology, and so on, we can start to kind of imagining that, oh wow, there are and have been different kind of ways of relating to our natural world around us, basically. So that's also one tool that we use. I would also say that another tool is really in collaboration with the experts, and we choose experts according to the topic, of course, but so we're developing like sections together with ecologists to understand processes and to understand how things relate. That's also a good tool. Interviews, the students are interviewing different actors to get these different perspectives. They're working in groups also, so that they, within the group, also understand each other and different interests, passions, and so on.
This is very important, especially like the group discussion.
Exactly. Yeah. No, we see that that's a very important part in the beginning of the studio, especially as that's when you frame kind of the issue, and also this with engagement and motivation again. We're really kind of supporting the students to themselves formulate the actual kind of problem formulation or the interest. So that gives them an energy into the task directly.
And Ania, you mentioned like your passion about culture and the green aspect, the ecology. Like, how do you support the development of student scenarios that reframe the human nature relationship, like the culture ecology or the human nature relationship?
Well, I think it's really to kind of open up this idea about what architecture is and the architect's role. And Hanna was talking about that earlier, but we quite often use the term living environments, basically. So we're constantly having that as the focus. Like, we are not designing a piece of something, we are designing a whole kind of living environment. And to try to understand what that is to, of course, try to make an example. What is this then? And one example that we use sometimes is just to make it a bit clear, maybe for the listeners as well. I mean, we and we will come into that later, but the topic of MASSA and waters again. But so this case or this example might be good for that. But if we look at the fisherman, of course, the fisherman is to kind of pursue his practice. He's depending on like flourishing fish-rich waters, let's say, and he's also depending on the fishing boat, the fishing shed, the gears, and in the end also he's depending on the sales point where he sells the fish, and then also where it's consumed. And this basically, this whole chain could be explained as one living environment. So if this is healthy or working, you could consider all the different steps in this chain, and this is how we also try to support the students to think in these terms when they design.
But when we also talk about living environments, there are different scales. So what are the scales that students are working with?
Well, it's also what Hanna talked about, this that when we start with a topic or an issue, we have to kind of be scaleless in the beginning, but we tend to start with a quite territorial scale, landscape scale, kind of just frame what kind of scene are we working in, what kind of natural resources or potentials are there. And out of that, and also challenges, and out of that kind of understanding reading, we are trying to formulate strategies, what can be done, what should be done, and so on, prioritize. And after that, basically, we are zooming in, and the students are also in their more kind of design phase, able to choose scales, but choose a scale that also makes sense in the larger kind of picture and the larger framework. So it could really range from territorial down to the, a detail.
Yeah, are the students choose what scale, right? Or you like assign?
No, yes. Some students are really kind of interested in working more strategical on a planning level, basically. And then they might find really good design strategies for developing, let's see, Stockholm's blue wedges, that's one scale. But then other students are really keen to understand like the technology of developing like underwater structures, and then they can zoom in on that. So it's really, we try to support students' interests and abilities. So.
Yeah, and Hanna mentioned also before like the holistic approach. So what does it mean to take a holistic approach for the students in this course?
Yeah, I think the holistic approach is definitely in there in the kind of the term living environment. But if we talk more generally, also what is maybe talked about a lot in media is, of course, we could take the example of the city landscape kind of issue. And so by just working with issues within the city and not understanding how that affects the hinterland, basically, that's a typical kind of example of where you do not kind of think about the holistic perspective, maybe. And in relation to the topic of the MASSA, this topic that we are pursuing this spring, it's of course it's related. We haven't talked about it yet, but it's relating to the extension of the subway and the million of tons of stone residue that comes up as an effect of the extension of the subway. And this has been pursued as one like project extending the subway. But if you have a more holistic approach to that issue, is of course, okay, we are extending the subway, but we are also creating all these stone masses. So what happens if we look at this as one system, like extending the subway and dealing with the masses at the same time? That would be a more holistic approach.
Yeah, I got your point. Yeah. Are there specific like geographical areas that the students investigate?
Well, we started off with the Stockholm municipalities. So, but we have most projects now are focusing in the inner parts of Stockholm archipelago, I would say. So the students are, some are dealing with more strategies on the municipality level, basically, and some are looking into more specific sites and testing some pilot ideas and so on.
So what are we expecting, like the result? What are you expecting?
Well, we're doing one large kind of strategic map where we are kind of trying to illustrate all different ideas and strategies that could be relevant. I think this map could be quite interesting as in relation to, we have the general plan for Stockholm, but this is our plan is looking at let's say the blue wedges in a completely different way. And then we have also developed, the students are developing a lot of interesting projects, like both extensions, new neighborhoods on water. They are looking into underwater parks, reefs, artificial islands. They are developing a lot of new public places, bathing sites, bird sanctuaries, So that's going to be fun also I hope that the listeners here at Urbanistica will also be able to see our exhibition. We are doing an exhibition at the Tekniska Nämndhuset. It's starting the 31st of May, so going on 2 weeks in June. And yes, that's also very interesting now in the times of Corona, how to kind of make things public and communicate the work. I mean, this is a physical space, Tekniska Nämndhuset. So Mustafa, you're helping us by doing these recordings to kind of also connect this exhibition to the interviews that you will do later on also with the students. So
yeah, it's a big pleasure for me to do that, and I think like it's a perfect time to be extra creative, like to experiment different way of communicating the project that students do. So you have like an exhibition, a physical one. Will we see also like a digital material?
Right. Yeah, we are also putting together a booklet with all the projects. The idea is that this exhibition will connect to a QR code to connect to the Urbanistica kind of series of interviews, as well as to this PDF booklet, so that the viewers can also look a bit more closely into detail in this booklet.
Yes, and in each episode description, I will have like the address to the physical exhibition with Google Maps link, and also like links to the different digital, let's say, material. So it's going to be very interesting. And thank you so much, Ania. Moving to Ulrika, let's talk more about like the care of city. So why do we need to work to integrate the green and blue structure in urban planning? You mentioned like you grew up in this beautiful atmosphere with the Baltic Sea and so on. So tell us why.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating question, because I think we wouldn't have asked that like 300 years ago or more. It's like then we were part of nature, and we were in nature, we were living in nature, and it's like we have this tradition and maybe religious belief that we are something separate from nature. And I think it's also this engineered approach that the Western world has a lot, and Sweden too. Engineering has been really highly thought of. So if we have a problem, we solve it by our strong engineer tradition. And so we talk about this green and blue structure, which is also quite engineered words. And we talk about ecosystem services, and they're also very like intellectual. So I think we need to integrate green and blue structure basically because it's part of our basic human needs to have clean air, fresh water, and much of the green and blue infrastructure can take care of the challenges in a very good way. But nature has been doing that, the earth has been doing that for millions of years. And now we have created our habitats that are quite sensitive to this climate change and the stronger, harsher weather conditions. And it's quite hard, the surfaces. So for example, water is not taken up so easily. And so we need to just take back that knowledge of asking nature for help and integrate it in our habitats.
And Ulrika, I will be honest with you, like then many of the investors, like property developers, what they look at are like the economical value, not really so much about like asking the nature to give us some like value. Sure. So how can we talk about the other values? And not only about the economic value.
Yeah, I see, because that's our challenge too. We have been wrestling with that in the Care of City. It's an association I'm active in. But everybody wants to know the economic value. And of course, that's important, but there are so many other values too. But I think we can talk about both, maybe try to keep both of them in our heads at the same time. But you can really see an example of, I was sitting in a project a few years ago, and it's urban, like a program to a plan. And we're discussing, should the street be 18 meters and no trees, or should the street be 23 meters with trees? And then but do we need the trees? And then we need these we do need the trees, but are they mandatory, or could we give like 5 meters extra to this office building? Maybe it wouldn't be an office building nowadays, it would be housing, because housing is the most needed then and now, but offices are on the decline. But seeing that you give either 5 meters to allow the trees, or you give 5 meters extra as this building right when you develop the plan. And that's where I also understood we need these hard facts about the green and what they do, and especially trees. And that's both hard facts and soft facts have been developed in the Million Tree program. It started in New York by Mayor Bloomberg. It has spread to many, many cities. That's calculating how much value a tree has and all the things it does. So, for example, like doctors in New York City, they said, I mean, we can't fight asthma any longer with what we have, the methods we have. It's an urban planning problem. It's the traffic that creates it. Too few trees that can absorb the particles and so on. So we have to understand this. So it's very much about knowledge. What does the green and blue infrastructure do? And how does that support our habitats? And that Million Trees program has spread now, and we got our own iTree, 9 cities in Sweden has been mapped, and there's a great study to read about that.
Yeah, that's so great to hear. So tell me, what is Care of City? You mentioned that. Tell us more about it.
Care of City started as a research project, and I think it's interesting you asked before about research and practice, and that was really a good example of when academia, municipalities, and private sector joined into a research project about urban ecosystem services. That was in 2011. I joined in 2012, and we developed tools and methods to integrate what is called ecosystem services, which is basically green and blue infrastructure into cities, and to make sure that they are active, that they are multifunctional. And when we had delivered the project in 2017, we realized we still had so much in common and still had work to do. So we formed this national association, Care of City, where I'm also a board member.
So what is the role of Care of City now?
We want to be this platform, like in between, like Boverket, the National Board of Housing, they have their directives, like you have to work with ecosystem services, and then the municipalities, they are starting to work with this, and the private sector. But with this association, we gathered academia, municipalities, and private sector to create this knowledge platform, basically, and exchange knowledge, good examples, like exchange and push knowledge about how to do this, how to integrate it in our cities.
Mm-hmm. And so how do we make sure that like the whole chain of politics, planning, designing, establishing, building, managing this environment are working? I know it's a very big question.
I think you have to be really persistent, and you have to build these relationships between all different actors, and that's why we need these networks. We need to know each other, because basically it's human beings behind all these titles and professionals. And so that's what we do in Care of City. And some have like worked in both private sector and in the municipality and academia. So we get to know each other, we learn, and we implement. Because as you're saying, the whole chain has to work. And I can really see at our conference in 2017, Carolina Skogen launched her Green Cities initiative, which was taken up by Care City, inspired by Care City, I have to say, and also encouraged by it, and then it's implemented in the municipalities and then down to the actual consultants, and then of course how it's taken care of and so on. So we have to be a lot of people with the knowledge, with the engagement to implement it and keep the green and blue structures alive.
Yeah, Hanna, you would like to add something?
Yeah, I was thinking about your question. I think also how do we get there? That question. I think this is also what our studio is about, to start, implementing this way of thinking early and make it, something that is not even questioned. That it's, of course, we need to build lead with landscape and have nature-based solutions as a part of the way of thinking. And I think also on the aspect of value, I think being in this world as a researcher for a long time, I'm almost starting to get a bit tired, if I may say so, of the kind of scientific arguments for nature. I mean, every article, every speech, every conference starts with kind of listing how nature is good for us. And I just want to say, okay, we agree on this. Let's move forward. How do we do this then? And that's what I think our studio is about also. And I think we've we have seen an incredible growth in the students in this just half year in embracing this way of thinking. So it's that's my comment.
Yeah, before we go to you, Ulrika, I agree with you, Hanna. Like we know the why. Like we have numbers, we have like everything on papers, Like now it's about the how.
Exactly.
Like, how do we do that? Yeah. Ulrika, you have a comment.
Yeah, I just really love how you bring in ecologists or several ecologists into the course already. And I can see that students really don't know how to integrate that knowledge, but just to start to ask the right questions. Start asking the questions, knowing that you don't have all the knowledge, and then like practicing on understanding another field of knowledge and how to integrate that in your design. So it becomes this holistic, really multifunctional working environment. I really love that.
Yeah, I have two questions. Like the first one is to you, Ulrika. Like, what do you see from your care of city work? Do you see like in Sweden there's like a now good way of teaming up and working from different disciplines and making things happen, or just like sharing knowledge, like telling the why?
No, I see that there are many municipalities now really integrating this work. For example, Malmö, they have this, they've established a street in the, like close to Bonollet. It's a really wide street, and how they clean the stormwater. And they have also planted a lot of different species of trees, because that's what we also know, that the global warming, it's really tough on trees, and we are not sure how they will take the global warming. So they're really experimenting. It's a research project, but then it's built one-to-one. So they research on it, and now it's a closed system, and then they will open the system up to the stormwater system of Malmö. So that's really hopeful to see that parks are established. I think Copenhagen is also really far, because they had this really heavy rainfall. Was it 2017 or 18? I don't remember. I think 17, somewhere there. And it was so expensive, talking about cost and so on. So they built this, is it St. Kjeldsplatz? Extremely green in the middle of the city. It's like not what you imagine to be in a city. So I think we also have to get used to seeing other green spaces in our cities, because it's been very much for decoration and not so much for action. And that's what we stated in Care City. Like, if we take care of nature, nature can take care of us. But if we don't give nature a possibility to take care of us, then it's like you find these dead trees. But this work with skelettjord, like skeleton soil, with the Stockholm street trees and biochar and so on, it's implemented. It's done all over. So it's really hopeful.
Yeah. So do you see, like, let's say in 10 or 20 years, like cities are really going to work with the ecological aspect as not a decoration, but more as action and function?
I think we have to, especially stormwater will be a big thing for cities, and their trees are experts. Wetlands and trees are experts in handling this, and built structures are not as multifunctional as the green structures. I think we'll see that. And I hope that together with this kind of reducing of the car and the spaces for cars in the cities, the green can take over that. So we don't use it only for housing, but for the green structure too.
Yeah, talking about the 5 meters, for trees or
exactly,
or buildings.
Exactly. And if trees or buildings or cars, I mean, it's a ridiculous amount of space needed by cars. So let's talk about mobility instead of like where we should put the cars.
Well, I think it's also something that people are now asking for. As if we again talk about economical kind of driving forces and so on, and the consumers that are supposed to kind of choose a living environment, let's say. I think Corona has also showed us that to sit, for example, and work at home and so on, you start to look at your living environment in different ways. So it's not just a unit to sleep in or an office to work in, but when you spend more time in a place, you start to kind of want more out of it as well. You want to hang out with people in outdoors, and you need different spaces and rooms. And I think people have started to dream in a different way of different types of living environments. And I think this will be a strong driving force for different type of development, housing development as well.
Yeah, exactly. And Ania, I wanted to ask you, because you're also my teacher for 5 or 4 years ago. I wanted to ask you about like students, the generation, the new generation. What do you see? Do you see there is like a shift in the mindset? Like the students are like really into this question of landscaping, climate change, and really care about this aspect, or like it's this have been the same since like a few generations before? Do you see like there is a change in the mindset?
Well, I think there is definitely a strong kind of development, and also in terms of interest, knowledge, engagement, and so on. I mean, I started with these types of topics for 12 years ago or so when I did my master thesis in Venice Lagoon, and then I remember these ways of thinking were really was really hard to find reference projects and so on. But today we are seeing more and more of them, and also practices as offices and new educations that are having this kind of transdisciplinary, much more kind of holistic approach to design. So I see that the students are also very kind of mature, so they're good at expressing themselves and their interests. They are engaged in large questions. They want to kind of take part, and they want to find their own kind of, what kind of architect should I be? And I think that's a new question that previously it was like, okay, I'm going to be an architect, and you kind of knew that, okay, I'm going to design houses. And this is now a much more open question, like what type of architect will I be, and how can I contribute, basically.
Exactly, like what is my mission as an architect?
Yes.
Hanna, any reflections?
Yeah, I think I agree, and I also think that these are very vast topics. They're kind of hard to wrap your head around, and I think it also, when it comes to climate change and the environmental crisis, it really creates a lot of anxiety in all of us somehow. And I think that's also an opportunity when kind of framing the question again in a very hands-on way to work with that anxiety. I feel so, at least personally, that following a specific issue and a specific problem is a help in that way to try to find solutions to the problem and handle it somehow.
Yeah, And on that note, just to create a project and a research or a studio and a research project around this so-called residue, that we can even think of things as a residue still. I mean, there is no residue basically in nature. So it's only resources, and it's about where you put it and how you see it. And just to have that as a start of your education, I think it's beautiful, and just carry that with you. So just how to organize these loops. So all resources are just put into the system again. Earth is breaking down and growing up things all the time. And we just have to be in that game as architects and builders. Since we are using so much material to construct our habitats, we really have to understand this thing about resource and that there is no residue.
Exactly. So thank you so much. I'm really happy to have this conversation, very inspiring, and looking forward to hear the students. And I would love that we finish this great episode by you giving us 2 takeaway messages to the listeners. We start with you, Ania.
Oh, thank you, Mustafa. Wow. Well, 2 takeaways. I would say one thing that I have thought about quite a lot is this modern idea about school within a building somehow, that we think that we can enter a house and sit there and learn about the life outside and so on. So I would really kind of recommend everyone within educations to think of the school as actually something that should take place in the real world. So I would encourage people basically to really test your knowledge as parallel to you reading about it, and really kind of get your hands dirty. And on the topic, Mustafa, you were saying like the how, really don't be brave to try things out, and also be active, in your local kind of context, to change also the things that are not working in your immediate kind of neighborhood, I would say. So somehow, I don't know if it's correct as a teacher to kind of recommend people to be also a bit activists, but I think we are in a time where that is so much needed. So that's maybe one. And I would say the other one of the takeaways, as we are also working with diploma students and doing their master thesis and so on, but quite often I get back to this point that you have to kind of follow your intuition, I think, to really kind of be sensitive to your own kind of driving forces and what is really engaging to you. And I think we should not kind of stop with being just, okay, this is an okay living environment, what are you really dreaming of? And don't stop until you kind of get there. And also to, when you are in this profession, to actually, where you have the power to change that, kind of try to do that, create those living environments worth fighting for, that stick, that you remember your whole life, basically. That's where our ambition should be, I think.
Yeah, so true. Thank you so much, Ania. Ulrika, what are your 2 takeaway messages to us?
I think I have to say, always make room for qualitative green and blue structures. And qualitative is when you have soil, deep soil, connection to soil, like not planting on concrete, but really qualitative green and blue structures where nature can do its job, basically. And then we can call it ecosystem services or nature-based solution or nature's contribution to people, or all these different concepts, but integrate good places for green and blue infrastructure. And then my second kind of takeaway or giveaway, or what do we call it? It's aligning with Anja's. Really find ask yourself, how can I contribute in a true way? I mean, we have to be all these different players that we were talking about earlier. And you are one of those players. And how can you be that in the best way? I'm asking myself all the time. And this kind of really basic and you can't do everything, but everybody can do something, and that's what we all have to do. I think basically just keep up the good work, create the environments we want to be in ourselves as humans in a nice way.
Thank you so much, Ulrika. Hanna, 2 takeaways.
Okay. Well, first, one takeaway is to kind of challenge all the urban-oriented design professions to this very dichotomous way of looking at nature and culture that is still very embedded, I think, in our professions. I think there has been a huge current kind of paradigmatic shift within ecological science and how we look at natural systems, where we had a view previously of a kind of nature imbalance view of looking at nature, where we saw natural systems as kind of linear and stable and predictable. And I think most importantly, as something we studied separated from humans. But then researchers, started to find that these systems were in fact much more dynamic and complex and unpredictable, and also importantly, entangled with us humans, always, in every situation. So I think that, a lot of mainstream architecture and urbanism and planning is still kind of stuck in this old way of thinking that nature knows best and nature is in balance and we are disturbing. But if we instead think of, okay, this is the normal, what happens then? How can we turn this into something good? And so that's one thing. And I think connected to that, I think there is a huge potential in what Nigel Cross coined as designerly ways of thinking, or design intelligence here. That we really, by having this built-in way of both kind of synthesizing various aspects and working in this kind of way of both being analytical but also projective, I think that's super important. It's not just as, fun little examples, but it's actually, a lot of research has shown that science fiction has always, shown the way to the future. And I think there is this huge potential in doing that as well, and not choosing, only to go green now or blue, but doing it all at the same time. That would be my main takeaway.
Yeah, that's really, really important, of course. Thank you so much. I'm really happy. I'm really honored to talk with you, and looking forward to more interesting talks about the blue, green, and the city as a one aspect. Thank you so much, Ania.
Thank you, Mustafa.
And thank you so much, Hanna, also for being here.
Thank you so much for having us.
And Ulrika, thank you so much for all experience and knowledge that you shared with us today.
Well, thanks, Mustafa. Thanks for having us. Our pleasure.
Well, thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica podcast. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. You learned something new and also got inspired by the guest. Don't forget to share the episode on your social media and recommend it to people you think they are really interested in this topic. Thank you so much again for giving your valuable time to Urbanistica podcast. I am Mustafa Sharif. Keep up the good work. Keep loving cities.